Hello, can everyone hear me? Hi, thank you for the applause. Just to be transparent, I wrote that down before, thanking you for the applause. So if you didn't applaud, it would have been super awkward, so thank you. So GraphQL without GraphQL. GraphQL inspired queries for collocating data requests with components. What does that mean? I don't really know. I think collocate was on a word of the day calendar for me when I made this CFP. So it sounded cool, and I sent it in. But basically, this will go through essentially how GraphQL introduced a lot of constraints around building an application. Not every application needs to make use of all those constraints. Not every application has the time to make all those constraints or the ability to. You might not control the backend. You might be doing like some hack day project where you want to use GraphQL style querying, but you still want kind of that expressiveness that GraphQL provides. So briefly, just go through what I will talk about today. What are the design principles of GraphQL? Like, what does the people that created GraphQL say GraphQL should be and what it should do? What's inherently appealing about it? Like, why do we want to use it at all? Or should we just not care? Can I use just parts of GraphQL? There's typing, there's querying, lots of things that are part of GraphQL, but can you just use a part of it? So GraphQL is amazing as the sum of its parts, but some of its parts are also amazing on their own. I thought that was a cool turn of phrase. So I'm Conor Hastings. I watched a lot of talks in preparation for this, and a lot of times they introduce themselves on like the third slide to like seem mysterious. So I decided to do that too because I thought it was cool. I'm a UI engineer at Netflix. I work on internal products, so I don't know anything about how Netflix.com works. If you're interested, I'm not the one to ask. I'm on Twitter, still Conor, GitHub, Conor Hastings, and here in the physical world, if the physical world exists, I'm on this stage. So just briefly go through the GraphQL design principles. There's 5. When going through the GraphQL spec in preparation for this and in working on a project, I looked at design principles. That's the part that really struck me the most. It might have been because it was just at the top and I was lazy and didn't want to read the whole thing, but it was also really interesting. So the first one that comes up is hierarchical data. The query is naturally hierarchical. Most modern applications are essentially view layers displaying hierarchical data. If you think of something like Facebook, it's a hierarchy of like posts, comments. Those comments have comments. There's people involved, I guess. So you can imagine a world in which you use this hierarchy to stub components out, and all the other things GraphQL queries are powerful for. Product-centric, this one is great to me. I feel like oftentimes when you're working like in a strict back-end, front-end environment, it feels like the API is created almost in direct defiance to the front-end consumer. So you're like either having fights with your back-end engineer, hopefully not, or you're like doing all these weird client-side transformations that break and are super brittle and you don't really want to have. So good for you, GraphQL, for being product-centric. Strong typing, I think this is kind of like the backbone of the GraphQL server implementation. You have a schema, it has types, you know exactly what you're going to get, what type you're going to get, which allows for a lot of freedom on the front end and doing stuff like type gen. So I won't talk about this a lot, though. I'll actually actively ignore it. So client-specified queries, very similar to the first two, but the client is the one, we flipped it. The backend's not a thing like, hey, this is what you got, go ahead. The client's kind of in control. It says what it wants, and the backend gives it back. I like to think of this as akin to a world in which a REST API or RPC API is you call and order a pizza, and it comes to your house, and there's like 40 pizza toppings on it, and it's like, take off the 37 you don't want. And here's like the 3 toppings you have, and your pizza's kind of gross now. And you still eat it because it's pizza, but you're not that happy. Whereas in GraphQL, you're like, I want these 4 toppings, and they're like, OK, here you go, which is polite and how pizza shops work, so why not APIs? And then the last one is it's introspective, meaning you can actually query the schema. Introspective is like a fancy word that I kind of don't understand, but basically you can ask the schema about types. It's how GraphQL is powered. But I won't get too much into that because I'll say you can't use it later. So then what's appealing about GraphQL? Why do we want to use it? I think I dove a little into it there, but I'll go a little further. The query system, extremely powerful, like I said. So outside we already just discussed, you have things like query directives, which allow you to implement things like Apollo's defer, skip, include, and other things that aren't necessarily part of the language specification that you can kind of build out yourself. You can use it to build out sample implementations, and maybe it goes into the spec, maybe it never does, maybe it's just for you. I know one of the talks mentioned schema directives. There's also query directives. Super nice to work with, I think. Less data over the wire, again, a big topic of GraphQL. You're only getting those 4 toppings, so it's less being sent over the wire, and I think in an increasingly mobile world and high latency world where we're actually thinking about our apps worldwide and not just for like 12 people that live next door to us with high-speed internet, this is increasingly more important. Same with reducing round trips to the server. High latency environments are not going to want to do that, so don't do it if you don't have to. And developer tooling like GraphQL, it's very nice to be able to write a schema before you have a front end, hop in, make sure the queries make sense, and kind of iterate on the API before a front end really exists. And then I know almost nothing. I'm lazy, so if you know anything else, tell me. Also, I listened to a lot of talks, so I did learn from those, hopefully. But then you come to the problem of not needing to solve all those problems, and you have constraints around time or constraints around tooling that you're using, and you just might not need to solve all those problems. So you really want to use GraphQL. You go to your boss, and you're like, I want GraphQL. It's going to send less data over the wire, it's going to be so fast. And then your boss is like, you make internal apps at Netflix for 200 users that all sit in a Netflix office with high-speed internet, and we really don't care about how much data goes over the wire because it will still be relatively fast. And you're like, true. I'll talk to you at our next one-on-one. It's a short-lived application, so you don't necessarily want to take the time to create the types. That's a slow-moving clock, or I guess a regular speed-moving clock, but still time, I guess. Oh, wait, that's not, is that there? Yeah, OK. Anyway, sorry. Yeah, so it just might be like a hack project, hack day. You want the expressiveness of the query, but you don't want to write all the types because you're lazy, like I am. Or you don't control the backend data source. There's a lot of things like that can be spun up quickly using something like Firebase, where you're not necessarily in charge of how that data is coming back to you. But you still want, or you're just experimenting with something, you still want that query expressiveness, but you really can't have the other parts, so it's not available to you. You can't have the strong typing, you can't have the introspectiveness. But that's cool, because it's all about the query system, which I think is the revolutionary part of GraphQL, that you can look at a component and you see exactly what data it's going to get, and it's super easy to work with. Someone that's new to a team can pop in, be like, oh, this is missing row width, type the row width, and then they have the data they want, which is nice because no one wants to feel bad on their first day of work. Yep, that's me falling off a couch at Netflix. So we've all felt like this, I think, working with unknown REST APIs, or inside of a large front-end application where we're just not sure how the data is controlled, and we just want to fall down and give up. I think this was within my first 2 weeks. So it's just like not made for the front end, and that's what people see, and that's who gets blamed. So let's make stuff for us. what you see is what you get. I think if you've been around for a long time, you might remember this word in a very bad way, using things like Dreamweaver and front page, maybe. I don't remember exactly what that one's called, but kind of just making these drag and drop UIs. But for me, with GraphQL, it makes a lot of sense. The data you see, the query is like you're going to get back that data, you're going to get it back in that shape, you can be confident about that. It's not going to be like Dreamweaver, it will be better. Yeah, declarative data fetching, another super important one. You can look at the thing right alongside a component and say, okay, this is sweet. I'm getting this data. Like we said, it's hierarchical, just like the data will be. And what a component receives and the hierarchical nature, it can really influence the thinking of how you build an application. Looking at a GraphQL query can influence how you might break down a component architecture or vice versa. You might structure a thing. Schema first development, query first development are things that GraphQL enables, and going to a Swagger page and being annoyed doesn't really allow for that. So just for like an example of a traditional app, Redux or something like it, I mean no insult to Redux. I've used it heavily and continue to, and this is probably like really bad Redux. But you might see something like this in an app because not everyone writes perfect code. We all work under time constraints. So it's your first day of work, and someone's like, we need that row width. You can handle that. It's your first day, and you've been working in the industry for some amount of years, maybe. I don't know. And you see just get user, get settings, and you're like, oh, OK, cool. There's 42 settings, and I don't know anything about this user. Whereas in the GraphQL world, you would see something like this. You're like, ID name created at, column width, theme, and you're like, oh, row width, nice, sweet. I think like the GraphQL query system, as I'll say again and again, is just like a beautiful gift to the world. I think of it a lot like I think of myself, like just a fantastic gift. That was Christmas morning. That was my gift to my parents because I forgot to get them something. They didn't like it. So I've talked a lot about the query system now and how sweet it is. And you're thinking, can we just use the query system? Because there's a lot of legitimate reasons why you might not use all of GraphQL, or you might want to do some kind of iterative approach where you're kind of experimenting with if you'll want to use it, and do you really want to build out the whole thing if you don't even know if that's going to be your final choice? I was originally just going to end the talk right now and say no, but I thought that would be really rude. And so yes, you can. Kind of. So the GraphQL JS team, they've really done a fantastic job modularizing everything that's a part of GraphQL. So you can use like just the parser, just the types, just visitors. So if you're willing to give up like some of the things of GraphQL, you can then use the query system as kind of like a state management and fetch system with your components and not have everything else. So if we look back earlier, you can still get the hierarchical data structure. You still get product-centric. Hopefully you're thinking about the product and not just making weird queries on purpose to be rude. Strong typing, yeah, bye, sorry. Client-specified queries, yep, still got them. Introspective, well, you can't introspect on a schema that doesn't exist, so I put the strike through there. And the appeal, we get the query system, we get the kind of the shape of the data along with the component, which is very nice. Less data sent over the wire, no, we're not going to get that, but there's going to be like a middleman that picks all the toppings for you, so it's kind of opaque to you that they sent you the gigantic topping pizza. Reducing round trips, you're not really going to get that, but you can do interesting things or interesting optimizations when a library is controlling the fetching as opposed to you controlling it yourself. And so you do get some wins there potentially, or some losses if you're really good at this stuff. Developer tooling, like you're not going to get graphical, you don't have a schema. There's nothing to introspect against. So how? RouteQL is a library I've been working on. Name pending. Someone suggested the name HalfQL, which I thought was a lot better. and I'm really jealous of them for being good at naming things. But theoretically, you could do this however you want. You could do similar things to what I'm doing here. This is not something that I would recommend using in production. Like, actually, please don't. I'll close the issue tracker if someone does. But yeah, it's just aiming to some of the paradigms from libraries like Apollo and just implement them in like a query system only kind of way. So yeah, I basically just read the Apollo documentation and copied a lot of stuff. So since it uses the GraphQL parser, though, if it's not a valid GraphQL query, it won't be valid. I'll call it HalfQL, a valid HalfQL query. So anything like, imagine a world in which you then have an actual GraphQL backend. These queries will still theoretically work. There's some small differences in the library implementation. You could implement something better that would make it easier. And I've been playing around with a CLI tool that would just automate the transition to Apollo if you had a backend, which would make it, maybe I'd open the issue tracker again. So let's look at some code, because I could just be making all of this up. I guess looking at code, I could still be making it up, but maybe you're more likely to believe me. So this is and keep in mind that these are all like very naive implementations. I didn't write the query inline on purpose, so it would be created every time. I was just doing this quickly and basically. So you want to fetch a post, ID, title. You show the title, you show loading. Really simple to grok. Pass in that variable. And then this is the same thing, except using RouteQL, HalfQL, whatever we want to call it. You'll notice like a couple differences in that it's not passing in actually the post ID here. So you're probably like, oh, how is it going to know what post to get if there's no post ID? And I said the same thing. I was like, oops, I messed up. But so there's this extra prop for now. I've done some experimentation about moving to standard arguments, but not quite there yet. But you essentially will get the props, you'll get the fields, you'll get the selection set, and you return this object that will have like route params, query params, and a request body if it's a mutation. And so this will essentially be the thing that is then constructed into a URL that is called. You can pass an endpoint into this thing directly, or there's a provider component similar to Apollo where you could kind of pass in your config, but theoretically, yeah, this is what is used to just construct a query. How does this work? So basically, for now, you can pass in just a string directly, and I'll parse it for you, or you can pass in the AST. Probably going to move the parsing out because that's less work for me and less surface area for mistakes when I think it's already been established in the community that people are willing to parse their own queries. So I don't know why I would offer something otherwise. But yeah, so just go, and then once it has the AST, it essentially, can you see that well enough? Yeah. So we'll go through this. It's going through the selection set, and it's getting, basically, it's calling that method. It's getting it's basically getting the params, query params body. It assumes if you're doing a query that it will be a GET request, otherwise a POST request, but you can override that with put and the like, whatever you want. And then it's going to go from there, form the parameter string, form the query string, and then form a fetch. And I use this library called fetch to dupe, which was made by one of my colleagues, James Smith. Essentially, this allows you to implement a lot of the same caching things that Apollo does. It has cache first, cache only, network only, cache only. So a lot of that stuff kind of just comes for free in the same way that Apollo has those things. You can pass in those options, which again makes potential migration to true GraphQL simpler. And then you can pass resolvers directly into the query, or you can pass it into like a bigger root resolver into the provider component, and this one will take precedence, but you can do it. I believe in you. But the resolver obviously exists on the client side because there is no server-side implementation of GraphQL here. So we can take a look at some examples. So this is just using a high-order component. It's getting person, post, and to-do, which is like a pretty classic app that everyone does. People post and to-dos. Maybe it's like your life dashboard and post means something else to you. I don't know. They're the first three things I thought of. You'll see the to-dos are changing, so you can use like the poll interval option, which is similar to Apollo. Subscriptions, I'm not convinced enough about it to work hard enough to put them in here. And I think polling works fine, and updating the cache works fine, which you will be able to do. And then same thing, but with the render prop, same exact thing. Yeah, and then essentially mutations work in a similar way. That is with high order component, and then render prop. And then this I actually just did this morning and put this slide in because I woke up early. So query deferral, which is similar to the @defer directive inside Apollo. To me, this was especially an interesting case because you are making the same number of round trips, and one of those round trips might be super unimportant, but take up the majority of the query. Like the to-dos, like you might not care to see your to-do list before you will know who you are, because it's like Memento or something. I've never actually seen that movie, so I don't know what happens. But you'll see here, like, this is if we just have a generic query without deferring, it takes like a really long time, and then we display all our data. Here, we kind of get everything really quickly except the to-dos, and then eventually those to-dos come in. So it's like a much nicer interface, and that's using just like the same exact directive syntax as the Apollo defer. So this is like one of the things that really shows you the power of directives, is that I was able to accidentally wake up at 6 a.m. and defer requests, and then put it in here dangerously. These are GIFs, though. I'm not one of those people that lives on the edge of live coding. Now you're saying, has it ever been used in a real-world app? Hopefully you think no, because I've told you not to. And real is in quotes, and usually when people put things in quotes, they mean, eh. So yeah, I mean, it kind of has. It's only used by me, though, which is nice. So does anyone know what this is from? Yep, the movie Clueless, hit 1995 movie starring Alicia Silverstone, based on, I think, Emma, the book, but I don't know, and it's unimportant to GraphQL. I remember watching this movie for the first time and seeing this, and I was so super duper jealous of Cher because she had this thing that showed her all her clothes and it could make outfits for her, and I was like, Mom, I need this app. Except I didn't call it an app because I don't think things were called apps until pretty recently. It's like, give me that computer thing. And so I was like, I need to try it and see if this library actually does anything. And so I built a React Native app for my own closet. So this was built by me in 2018. Cher's app is much better than mine. She has machine learning, which like tells her if outfits match or not, which seems like she had like the best development team in 1995. I don't know why other people were hiring them away from her closet. But yeah, so I was able to use the library, make requests, get my clothes. I plan outfits in here sometimes, wake up the next morning, reduce that decision tree of the morning, and it's super nice. Yeah, so I will not pretend like I totally invented this on my own, although for like 10 seconds I thought I did before I used Google. So there's GraphQL Anywhere, which is made by Apollo team, and that kind of allows you to execute anything in a schemaless way, any like compliant GraphQL query. There's some differences around, like you would have to make the fetch yourself, so you would essentially maybe call the GitHub REST API, or make, and then you'd pass in that data along with the query and get back what you want. And then this is one that I actually super recommend if you want to do an incremental move to GraphQL, is Apollo Link REST, which allows you to decorate queries with @REST if it's going to hit a REST API, and you pass in a path argument. And so if you're actually going to move your organization to GraphQL, This is really nice. I haven't actually tried it, so I don't know if I'll take that back to super recommend and make it just a recommend. But it looks cool, and if it works like it says it does, I bet it is dope. And then probably other things, probably the exact same thing maybe, because other people are smarter than me and GraphQL's been around for a long time. Okay, so I'll just now briefly recap what is currently supported. So you can query and mutate any arbitrary backend using render props or higher order components. And every query is GraphQL compliant, or it will fail. Polling for new data with follow interval, which I've generally found works in most cases, or stale data, like was mentioned before. Stale data is generally okay for a lot of things. Similar caching options to Apollo. Caching data, you can read and write from the cache soon. I'd say it's supported now. Well, I guess I didn't. It's on my computer. I'm waiting for some other library merges. And then probably some other stuff that I'm forgetting, because I do a lot of this, like I said, at like 6 in the morning or 2 in the morning or weird times, and I just don't remember what I do. And it's poorly documented, to be upfront. What's coming? Sorry. Oh, top-level deferred queries. I switched what slide it was on this morning, so I forgot to say it because, there you go. Because I did it this morning, so I moved it from the what's coming slide to the what's supported slide. So one problem I've run into actually using this with my clothing app is currently it only supports making requests at the top level of the selection set. So you can't have a sub-selection set request or resolver, which becomes an issue especially as something grows, and for deferring data at a lower level depending on how your data is being fetched. I think I found a way to move to arguments, which would be both more in line with Apollo and other GraphQL implementations and allow an easier kind of transition, like kind of probably like a one-line CLI change if you actually have a schema in this world. Provide the automated migration path, even though I told you not to use it. I guess this is just for me to do for fun to see if I can. And optimistic updates, like I said, that's coming very soon. It's just waiting on a merge and direct access to the cache. So basically, this is just meant as an experiment to show there's a lot of stuff you can do with GraphQL that's not necessarily full GraphQL. I think we've just been scratching the surface of what GraphQL can do, and thinking about uses past just fetching data is interesting because a lot of the world exists in hierarchies, and there might be other things we could do with it. And I think it's really empowered client-side developers to have more control over their data, and I think it's powerful just as a state management system. And if you make some sacrifices, you can still leverage the GraphQL query system and other parts of GraphQL without having a full GraphQL implementation. And that's because of like the hard work of the Apollo team and the GraphQL team to really modularize everything and lets you do kind of wacky experiments in your home late at night. Yeah, that's it. I'm still Conor. GitHub at Conor Hastings is my real name. I tried to be professional there, but it's not that professional. And yeah, I'm at this conference in the physical world. It might be, even though it's ending soon, so you can find me and ask me questions or tell me stuff. You probably know more than me, so you probably tell me stuff. And yeah, thank you for your time. Thanks.